everybody. Welcome to the Healthy Sales Department CheckUp. This is the first in our EOS webinar series. And today we are going to be doing a deep dive into how a sales process is really a great prescription for building a healthy sales team and driving revenue. So my name is Kate Norton, and I sit in the sales seat at the Sales Collective. I'm your host for today and for the entire webinar series. We hope that you'll join us. We'll be getting out information about future webinars around some amazing topics to build a healthy sales department. Today, I'm also joined with Orlando Castillo, who is I call you our sales process guru, Orlando, but I also like to lovingly refer to you as a sales playbook practitioner. So I think a practitioner is good to have, on board for this conversation as we look at building a healthy sales department. So would love if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do for the Sales Collective.
Sure. You can hear me okay, Kate. Is that right?
Sure can.
Okay. I specialize in sales process transformations. My name is Orlando Castillo. And basically, I help companies by consulting with their CEOs and their chief revenue officers to modernize their selling techniques and optimize their existing sales process or sometimes lack thereof. And a key part of my work is really developing a unified playbook to help sales teams effectively sell in a disciplined manner. You actually put together, sometimes the easy version is I help sales put together their kind of cookbook. So in a way that they can actually use it, they can adhere to it, and they can all become a master chef.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll be talking a little bit more about that, and it's lunchtime, so hopefully we won't get hungry talking about recipes and cookbooks. But thank you for that intro, and you do a lot of work, and thank you for picking your head up and taking yourself away from building sales playbooks to join us today. So we appreciate you. It occurred to me that we have quietly slipped into Q4,
Yep.
here on October 8th. And we are only 85 days away from January 1st, 2026. So it is hard to imagine. And that leads me to wonder if any of the folks who are tuning in or who may listen to this later are feeling like they have not hit their revenue goals or are not on track to hit their revenue goals this year. And if that's the case, are they evaluating as they're going into their quarterlies, or into their annual session? Are they evaluating what the root issues are around why they haven't hit those revenue goals? And as we know, if we're a company running on EOS, those root issues typically come down to people or process. That's typically when we distill down to what is the problem here? Why are we not driving revenue? It's usually a people or process issue. And so that lends us to hitting a ceiling, right? Hitting revenue growth ceilings. And often, when we're hitting ceilings, our EOS business operating system or any other business operating system we may be working under has tools that we can go to look at and utilize and use to, do that healthy checkup. And the tool that we are going to be exploring today, and it is in our EOS binder. I know this is a little old school for those of you who are running on EOS. I've been kind of, in the EOS landscape for about 8 years. So I have had a lot of experience, and that's my old notebook. But on page 35, whether you've got the old notebook or the new book, is the Healthy Sales Department CheckUp. And sorry, that's a little bit fuzzy. We'll get a screenshot of that we can share in the Slack. And on the sales department checkup, it comes down to people and process. And we can get you 90% covered on a healthy sales department around process. So let's kind of start with the basics, Orlando. If I'm doing what I want to do, sitting in a sales seat, I'm relatively successful. I'm hitting my scorecard numbers every week. I'm driving towards revenue. Why do I need to have a sales process?
Why do you need a sales process? So, if we look at what you just shared in the sales department checkup, I think it's the third one, a clear sales process. It says documented, simplified, and then it says FBA. FBA followed by who?
All.
Followed by all. All right. So if it's a game of telephone, it's really hard for a visionary or a founder to disseminate their specific way that they want you to follow. We've had some EOS practitioners and companies that I've worked with through you in the West Coast, and they have a very specific California market, and it's all in this individual's heads.
Mm,
And if you don't document it, now it becomes just almost hearsay. It's like
yeah.
it's a really good story, and so you're trying to follow a story. And we won't get into CRM just this second, but like, a CRM does have an entrance and an exit criteria, and let's put that in the playbook or in the sales process itself. And then we also want to be able to understand, the stage we're in. Are we prospecting, and what does prospecting look like, and what are the best sales behaviors? What are the processes we want to have? And then maybe we're getting into qualification. And so there's, qualification is a big piece of understanding where you are and what you want to embrace and what do you maybe disqualify, when you really talk about it. And so having something documented, having a sales
Hmm.
process documented means that you can follow that recipe
Yeah.
and you can understand where you are within a sales cycle, or perhaps even understanding your funnel and starting to look and have some rigor in some conversion. So my blanket answer is, if it's going to be followed by all, it needs
Hmm.
to be documented. It needs to be, is the word of the morning. You were asking me about one of our clients this morning, and I use the word codify. And it's not
Mm,
something you would use often, but
mm-mm.
how do you actually document and codify your sales process so that people can follow it? And I also emphasize it should be an evergreen document. It should be something that is evolving, and it should be something that you are constantly tweaking to make it better. So that's the
Iterating it.
iterating it exactly.
Yeah.
So my core is, if you're really going to have something that people are going to follow, you have to have something documented. That's your sales process.
Yeah, and you do bring up that it is the third check mark under the 8 competencies of a healthy sales department checkup. Like I said on page 35 of the toolkit. Um, and I think it's worth mentioning what the other ones are, because we're going to zero in on clear sales process. But you also are looking for the right sales manager. One person accountable. You're looking for a clear marketing strategy plan and materials, including your 3 uniques and your ICP and your proven process and guarantee. You're looking for your sales culture and approach defined, managing the numbers and activity, making sure everybody understands their number, the right people in the right seats. And we'll have our next webinar series is going to be fully around that, our PRS and the sales seat. We want to have minimum standards clear with all salespeople. Well, a sales process creates minimum standards, correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we start to pull threads from everywhere that you
Mm-hmm.
have in the checkup. So
Yeah.
a sales manager is, one person accountable. Got it. Right person, right seat. What do you want them to hold people accountable to? And so
Mm-hmm.
by giving them a sales playbook and a sales process means that you have something. We even go as far as sometimes to do gamification. And so we'll call it our
Mm-hmm.
daily 100. Some of our clients use it as a way to incent good habits. Others go the whole other area, and they actually align their compensation to great behaviors that they want to see and enjoy as part of their rigor. And so, when you start looking at, having a sales manager and having a sales process, that's part of it. But then also looking at the actual, like you mentioned a little bit in terms of culture and approach defined.
Yeah.
Well, it gives
Yeah.
us a way to actually embed that in our processes. And then, using a scorecard. Okay, so a scorecard against what activities? Well, that should be documented as well. And then you said about your ICP, that's going to be in there. How you actually look at maybe even discovery, or how you actually lay out your specific problems or traps. That's another way to really allow your sales process and your playbooks to flourish, so that people don't get stuck or put into a position where they can't really do their best work.
Sure. This subject I think is near and dear to my heart because I have sat in a sales seat for 20 years. I was in enterprise sales for the first 10, where there were a lot of really smart brains that would put, these processes in place. We knew who to call on, at what frequency, with what message, how to account tier, what our scripting was. We would role play, we would do training. And then you come into the entrepreneurial selling environment,
Hmm.
and I've been in a situation personally where, the visionary didn't have this documented and they really did the watch me strategy for
Yeah.
onboarding, right? Where they were like, hey, Kate, watch me, do what I do, and then, go do it. I mean, and to take that even a step further, or you're the salesperson, you're in the sales seat, you go build a playbook. So talk to me about how that works when a salesperson tries to build their own playbook, as they come into an entrepreneurial company.
Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. What ends up happening is um, there's typically a lack of process, true process, and also understanding where things fit in terms of what comes first, second, third in order of operations. So let's take two steps back. So sometimes you hear people say, "Well, I've got a CRM, I've
Yeah.
got a sales process."
Right.
And so, I published, or we had something actually on our blog that is called Your CRM Checklist Isn't a Sales Process and Why That's Killing Your Revenue. So we put that on in August. If you're interested in that, I'll grab a link real quick and put that in the chat in case anybody's interested. But in terms of that, if you take a step back, oh, I've got a CRM, I've got a process.
Mhm.
You
That's
have a
not
tool.
a that's not a process. I don't understand. I sit in a sales seat. I follow my CRM. Why is that not considered a sales playbook, a
Well,
process?
it is a tool, and you have to understand what does that tool want you to do in those sales stages, and are you really doing the behaviors at each stage, and are you, for example, understanding what is the opportunity or the actual distance between where you are and where that buyer is.
Mhm.
And in terms of following a process and understanding, for example, let's say we're doing solution sales and we need to understand intimately what that problem is and how to measure that particular problem. So we want to have more than just a tool that says, okay, I had a prospect and now they're a lead, and I had the lead and now I'm qualifying them, and now I'm going into discovery and I'm going to do a proposal. And sometimes you just use a CRM and then you just drop into where you're actually going, and none of it's happening within that CRM. So a CRM by itself is never a solution. A CRM is a complement or a tool. So now let's go back to your initial concept and the hypothesis. Hey, I'm a visionary. I know how to sell. So I'm going to write it and it's going to be great.
Mhm.
Okay. So a lot of times it's what is in their head and how their culture and their ability to uh, write down and create something that is an objective or something that another person could follow as an instruction.
Mhm.
And typically, folks are not developed or trained or experts in how to actually look at writing an objective and measuring it and what are the steps that are following it. Um, you know, you and I have talked about recipes, and
Yes.
you were telling me a story. Tell
Yeah.
tell our listeners what that story is.
Well, when I think of the analogy of when we look at the checklist here, clear sales process, documented, simplified, followed by all, what I thought of is I think about my nana, my dad's mom, and she had an amazing turkey and stuffing recipe. It was
Hmm.
really the stuffing that we all loved, right? And I know it's controversial, do you stuff the bird or not, but she did, and we all loved it. And I said to my mom at one point, lots of years ago, like, hey, how do I make this for my family? And she's like, no, we don't have the recipe. We don't have it written down. We don't have it documented. We don't have it simplified. It was like a dash of this, then this sausage. And then we didn't know it had to be Pepperidge Farm breadcrumbs and it had to be this amount of butter. So finally, my mom and my aunt sat down and watched and wrote it down, simplified it, put into a recipe card that now all of my cousins and I can follow. And so it's followed by all, right? And so that is an analogy we often use, that in order to create a recipe for success or a playbook or a sales process, we use those two words interchangeably. We've got to get the components, the ingredients. We need to understand all the ingredients and we have to get it written down. So I think that brings me to the question of, before even the CRM, what are the ingredients we have to get put in place in a proper sales process playbook? What are you working with companies on?
Well, that's an interesting piece. So uh, you have a lot of components that feed into a sales process.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the ingredients to this
Yeah.
recipe. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start looking at it, a person says, well, we have a market that we sell to. Okay. Well, let's use the terminology ideal customer profile. Okay.
Yep.
So we're just going to start with that aspect. Well, an
Which
ideal,
Orlando is that
yes,
should be on their VTO, right?
it should be.
It should
And
be.
typically when
Mm-hmm.
I've seen VTOs that have been shared with me, either
Mm-hmm.
from you or from those clients, it becomes very clear. But
Mm-hmm.
typically it's not segmented or tiered.
Right.
It's defined, it is this or it is not this, but an ICP can have a little bit more texture and dimensionality to it,
Yeah.
because an ideal customer profile might have the perfect, so it might be the top of that tier, and it could also be segmented across various lines of business. And a lot of
Yeah.
times when you're looking at an ICP, you want to have a true sense of who is the perfect fit, who's a good fit, who may be an automated fit, or something that you don't want to spend a lot of time. Because if you think about your sales force or your sales person, all they have is time, and you need
Right.
to be able to structure that time. So even though it's a small document, or it's a usually a list of what things are, I also like to put outliers. Is there any other person that you do business with? Is there somebody else that is out there, or is there somebody you absolutely positively don't do business with? I had a client this morning that we were talking about working on ICP next week, and they said we can't do work with electricians. And I was like, is it because of the union? Is it that part of it? It's like, no, we don't have the insurance for that. We're self-insured. And so they needed to stand up another component so that they could actually offer their ICP more opportunities. And so
Sure.
once you have that ICP component, I like to start looking at personas. Now, before I go into that,
Mm.
um, personas aren't, one size fits all, but it's hard for people to understand a persona if it is blended. So, what I want to make sure that the listeners understand is a persona is typically who who are you talking to from a sales perspective? What are their pain points and motivations, and how can you help them directly? Okay, so it's a title, it's responsibilities, it's what could hurt, or what are they motivated by, and then ultimately what can you offer them. So the big piece of a persona is why. You really want to
Mm.
understand their personal why. And I bring out personas, Kate, because even though I might write them as an individual, here's Gary the gift maker. It might be that persona, and this is what's going on with their pain points and their motivations, and what my client might be able to do for them. There are blended personas, and we are all human,
Sure.
and we're all real. And so, but understanding those allow you to ask persona based discovery questions, and it allows you to pull apart and understand what are the motivations of that particular prospect, so you can truly understand what's going. And then you can go deeper, and you can start peeling that onion skin and go deeper and deeper and understand what is their real problem, what are they motivated by, and how do they want to measure that particular success. I'll pause here because I've got lots and lots more to talk
Yeah.
about. But what strikes you right now between the ICP and the personas?
Well, I mean, I think we're just double clicking down into the VTO, into the marketing section of the VTO is what I'm
Mhm.
hearing you say, and really, creating a roadmap for success for the salesperson. So, so that if I'm looking at a sales playbook, what you're telling me is that I'm going to really understand who my buyer personas are. It makes me
Mhm.
think about when I did enterprise sales in a medical space. I had really smart marketing folks telling us which doctors to call on and what their pain points were and what their buyer persona was in order for us to serve their needs. And so that's what you're doing with the companies that we work with, is you're really digging into the individual personas and creating scripting, correct, on how, and competitive battle cards. And so tell me about some of the things that you're writing up, because people may want to develop their own playbook here, and they should.
Sure.
What would they need to be, what tools would they need to be pulling out and documenting?
Well, I think you pulled a really interesting thread in terms of marketing in the VTO and understanding the buyer. I think
Hmm.
that's a piece, or it can be a blind spot for a visionary, a founder, somebody who's writing it for themselves. And so when you start to really look at that buyer's journey and understanding what is that sales process. So we talked about ICP, we talked about persona. Well, we also
Mhm.
need to look at value proposition. We need to
Right.
look at the elevator pitch in terms
Mhm.
of how do you communicate that value. We need to look at differentiation. We need to look at discovery. We need to really also understand traps and objection handling. We need to understand your inbound go to market, your outbound go to market motions, and how are you doing outreach and how are you doing actually lead generation. You should really understand your daily habits so that what are you going to measure and what are the things that are going to go into that potential CRM, whether it's a homegrown CRM or something you've bought off the shelf or something that you're building to tune, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot or Pipedrive, whatever it might be, in terms of those pieces. And if you're going to build this yourself, you're also going to need to look holistically. How do you put all these pieces together into a playbook so that
Mhm.
you actually have a referenceable, trainable vehicle? A lot of times I ask a client, hey, I see so and so. If you were to hire a new salesperson, how would you onboard them? What would you do? And sometimes there's a little pause, and sometimes there's a little like look up here, and sometimes there's a direct well, Orlando, we would do OJT. We would do on the job training.
Mm.
Okay. So
Send them out with the best rep.
what right. Or they're going to shadow me. Well, how long are they going to shadow you for? And,
Right.
and is that really a scalable solution to your growth and what you're doing? So yes, you can absolutely do this yourself. You can absolutely write a sales process, but you also want to be able to put in and kind of apply best practices and look at what is going to be measured and how are you going to actually follow it, and what's the discipline of FBA, what's the
Right.
discipline of followed by all. And so
Sure.
so making sure that there's an adherence and a consistency is really part of this process that we want to actually have, and the construct that actually happens around it. So let's focus the magnifying glass on a visionary and a founder. You've been doing this for many, many years, and when you're looking at somebody who's got it trapped in their head and
Mhm.
they know it, but they don't know how to get it out, what do
Yeah.
you ask them?
Well, I mean, that's what we do here, right, at the Sales Collective. But if somebody's doing it and kind of doing it a DIY, and maybe it's a rock for them, going into the fourth quarter, even Q1, building a sales playbook. I mean, you have to really carve out a lot of time and ask them, what the steps are that they go through in order to have that recipe of success. I mean, we've talked about the foundations here of why we need that sales playbook, but it brings me up to the challenges, right? Of once you take on that rock to create one,
Hmm.
where are those pitfalls? And it makes me think about, we get asked a lot about, well, our teams don't want to be micromanaged.
Hmm.
So where is the pitfalls that you might see that people might run into, either developing it on their own, or let's say they, do develop it successfully, rolling it out to the team?
Well, here's one more shameless plug. So we put out a blog at the end of September talking about the sales process and its alignment with your buyer's experience. And
Hmm.
so, in terms of what are the pitfalls? Well, one of the pitfalls are that you don't take the buyer's motion or expectations, because they want a seamless experience. They don't want to understand what's happening behind the scenes. And so if your CRM stages are based on, how you are working behind the scenes or how you get it operationalized or how you move it through the process, and you're not taking into account how the buyer feels or understands, you're being a little myopic. You're being a
Yeah.
little bit close, in terms of just seeing what you need to see. And so one of the pitfalls is actually taking a step back and understanding how your buyer buys,
Okay.
and really understanding that your CRM stages should be aligned, but they shouldn't dictate how a buyer buys. They shouldn't be, going out and they do a competitive research and they see what's out there, and then they come to you and they might want to quote or they might want to talk about it or see how you're different. Well, that pitfall is, well, this is how we sell. wow,
Yeah,
that can be very abrupt for a buyer, and it can leave them with a lacking feeling. And so
right.
there are opportunities to actually listen and to understand what is happening when a buyer stops talking to you or falls out of your pipeline or falls
Hmm.
out of your funnel. So you really need to understand and align those particular pieces, and understand that buyer's journey. So mirror how the buyer actually is going to evaluate and decide on a vendor or a partner or a solution. Okay.
Sure.
Um, and then you also want to understand how those buyers' actions line up with the reality that you're actually doing it. So don't force feed it into that CRM. And then
Right.
we want to make sure that if an internal team is handled, sometimes there's an evaluation, sometimes there's a test drive, sometimes you want to make sure that that's as seamless as possible, because there's nothing worse than you handing somebody over to me and I go, who are you? What do you do? How do you do this? And it makes a person feel as a buyer unheard and not
Hmm.
valued. So some of the pitfalls are just being really open, really transparent, understanding that there are components and operations that happen under that, but you still want to recognize the uniqueness of a buyer's motion. How are they really going to do this work? How do you really want to track it? And what are the component pieces that you want to move through these areas? One thing I think I need to call out is entrance and exit criteria.
Mm. Even the
Okay.
CRM, you mean?
No, I actually
Okay.
mean in terms of the behavior. So an entrance and an exit criteria could be in the CRM. But if we go back to the document that you put up, which is the sales department checklist,
Hmm.
you know, we want to have something that is a criteria that is not just used in a tool, but makes sense to move something forward. So follow with me for a
Hmm.
moment. Let's go on this journey. So if you have a prospect, do you jump them immediately to negotiation?
No, you haven't built, you haven't uncovered, and hopefully you're selling consultatively and you're uncovering what their needs are.
Exactly. So we want to take that person and trust the process. You've heard that
Hmm.
many times before.
Right.
So we have a prospect and we mark them as a lead. And we might, if you're using HubSpot, you might have a marketing qualified lead. You might have a various different formulations of how you got your lead. All right, so maybe the system has qualified some of it, but if you've contacted that person, you want to still have some rigor as you're going through. And so recognize it's a discipline of a process that's applied to a CRM tool, not a CRM tool that dictates, well,
Yeah.
this is a stage, and this is a stage, and this is a stage. So you're really seeing, can you move forward because you have enough information to move forward? If you haven't done real discovery, if you really haven't understood who that person is, what their challenge is, their problem, their issue, or where you can actually help the most and what that future state looks like, you're not quite ready to move to a proposal because you really don't understand them. This is maybe where you might get into, well, I've heard this word, and so I'm going to give you this feature, and you
Yeah.
might fall into that trap. And so those exit and entrance criteria allow you to go back and recognize you haven't fulfilled what happens to move to the next stage so that you can fully provide what you need to that buyer and be able to give you confidence that you've done everything in your stages, whether it's a qualification to a discovery or discovery to perhaps a proposal, a negotiation, or even a quality close and a handoff to the next
To
person.
delivery.
But all of those are documented and all of those are applied and evaluated so that it's actually part of this greater opportunity to refine. And like you were talking about before, in terms of it's an evolution. It's a way to actually iterate on how things are working. So if you think about it, you have a business, somebody has started it and they go like, well, how should I run it? Well, EOS is a great solution to running your business. Great. Now I start following EOS and I get traction and I do my VTO and I start working through things. Now, how do I go further? Well, some of the things that are documented in terms of having all your processes documented or your
Core
overall process,
process.
your core
Yeah.
processes,
Hmm.
that it asks you to do that. So how do you start to scale And how do you start to actually create, I'll use that word again, codify what you're
Hmm.
doing in such a way so you have the instrumentation, the tools, the guide in order for you to get from here to there. And then once you've recognized, how can you refine that? What are the components? How are you going to measure that in your CRM? How are you going to look and evaluate your conversion in the various sales stages? So it starts to actually pull it all the way in and give you a tool so that you can actually, with confidence, run a sales program with a sales manager, a sales process, and a sales playbook. You can onboard people faster, and you can have someone who becomes fully operational and making their quota.
Their ramp time is decreased, certainly
Absolutely.
with a sales process. I'm thinking about a couple things here. I'm thinking about how, you know, we talk about LMA, leadership management accountability, and sales
Okay.
managers have that as one of their, five key roles, on the accountability chart, or their five key responsibilities is LMA. And a sales process is absolutely necessary in order to manage to success. And so you're talking about a lot of details here, but those details are necessary in order to manage and hold accountable. So I think we all agree on that. But as a salesperson, I'm going to just address the elephant in the room here,
Please.
right? You're taking away my uniqueness. You're taking away my ability to be flexible. You're taking away, how I just do my thing, Orlando. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to me about that.
So, okay. This is an interesting paradigm. I call it freedom within the framework. I don't,
Okay.
I, sometimes I will go to a client and say, hey, if I produce an inbound script for you as part of the sales process, will your folks follow it? I have a client right now, and he has texts and he has emails that are documented, and we're increasing his reoccurring business. He has about
Mhm.
8,000 events that happen in a calendar year, and 3,000 of them are not reoccurring, and he would like to have them reoccurring. Okay. And so, that freedom within the framework. So the framework still might be a verbal checklist or a methodology of things that we want to occur. But Kate, you say it in your own terms. You do what you need to do. You have the freedom to communicate the way you want to. But in terms of our ingredients and our recipe and our application of that recipe,
Mhm.
we want to have a framework that you can follow. And so you can do what you need to do, but this is the sales process that we want to roll out, and we want to have that type of adherence. So a person says, well, that's still micromanagement. Like, well, we still want you to follow a sales process, but we're giving you autonomy and choice to make it your own. So does that land with you as a seller?
Yeah, it does. I go back to my Nana's recipe, right? If we know that that is a successful recipe that everyone's happy with, that gets, high fives and cheers around the Thanksgiving table, right? And that's what we want to follow. Great. We can add some different, I may end up having sweet potatoes and not the layered salad my mom had back in the 70s, right? We can add some variety to what we are serving, but we know that those key components are what will create success. So I appreciate that, but it is something that we have to address. We have to address the fact that some salespeople, may feel micromanaged, but frankly, what we know with EOS operating system is that once we put process in place and once we put accountabilities in place, we flush out right people, right seats, because your highest performers want accountabilities. They want to know how to win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do want to know how to win and how to succeed and how to get better in a lot of ways. We've
Yeah.
got about 9 minutes left together, just giving you a time check. In terms of looking at, so my wife Jamie.
Mhm.
And so let's use that recipe one more time in terms of, if you gave me a recipe book for your Nana's stuffing, and Jamie and I were going to sit down and actually make that recipe. Well, the first time you follow the recipe religiously, perfectly, then you can start riffing off of it. Well,
Mm.
again, I still want you to follow the sales process. I still want you to have rigor. I still want it to be FBA followed by all. But if you find a way or you identify something that is either an opportunity to make something better or a refinement, or you find that this works, this particular discovery question or this question opens up an entire world. We want to be able to also take that and learn from an improvement and put that into the sales version. And so a lot of times you'll see I'll put like version 1, version 2, version 3
Mm-hmm.
in my sales processes. And a person says, well, is it constantly changing? Yes. It should always constantly be growing and evolving into the best product it can be. And so if you're able to go to a visionary or a founder and actually say, hey, this is important, it's not only maybe a rock that you've signed up for, but it is part of how you grow and mature as an organization. And so you document your sales process and you pull it out of that visionary or that founder's head. And then you have all the component pieces and you have perhaps a CRM in place and you have a sales playbook and you can onboard and do all these things. Now, how do you get even better? How do you improve that process? You've got it documented. People are following it. You can measure and see where in those conversion rates, where does somebody get stuck in the funnel? What are things that are happening behind the scenes? It starts to give you transparency into the business because you have consistency and you've actually got something documented that you can refine and revise.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about how you can bring this into the hiring process as you're starting to scale and grow. Because, if you're hiring and vetting somebody for that seat, and you're sharing that this is how we operate. We have a sales playbook, we have a sales process. We're always looking for iterations. We're looking for your creativity if you were to come on board. We're looking for ways that we continue to grow. Maybe part of our culture, our core values is to always be growing or something like that. So if you can bring that into the hiring process and be talking about how your system works, you are actually going to be attracting the high performers that want to operate within a system. What do you think about that?
Oh, so here's my third plug, even for some of our own material. So you are very familiar. I don't know if our entire audience is, but we use an instrumentation called Sales DNA. And within the Sales DNA, you have 21 competencies when you're looking at it as a seller. And one
Mhm.
of the things I insist upon when we're using those selling competencies within that DNA is also looking at the sales behavior that are actually dictated at every stage of a sales process. And
Okay.
so when you talk about hiring, you might hire and use the sales DNA as an instrumentation to figure out where their opportunities are and is this a good fit and are they a strong seller? But it also can be, hey, Kate, thanks for coming in. I understand that you've been selling in this part of nutraceuticals or this part of pharma, and I need you to come over here and start selling on a SaaS base or a service base. And here are some sales behaviors. How do they fit for you? Where is your ability? How comfortable are you with this? So I might have a sales DNA that says you're a great seller. Now I can actually go a little deeper and say, how do you like selling? And these are the behaviors you see in our sales process. Does
Yeah.
that invite you in and recognize we have a way, not
Right.
just here's a list, go sell. That
Right.
sometimes happens. And that I would imagine doesn't make you the most comfortable seller.
No, I mean it really lends itself to the culture of a company that believes enough in somebody coming into the organization to give them the right tools to be successful. And that is what I believe, as part of building a sales process and having a healthy sales department. The other thing I'm thinking about is one of the competencies on the sales DNA is a figure it out factor.
Mhm.
And it's a really key piece for entrepreneurial companies, and we'll probably get into this, in our next webinar on November 20th around hiring. But for those companies that are bringing in their first one, two, three, four, individual contributor, and they don't have a sales playbook in place, they better be bringing in people that have a very high figure it out factor.
Oh, yeah.
That can move and shift and be, because just to say, here's the revenue number, here's your scorecard, go for it, isn't it, you're setting them up for failure. And
So
so we are, yeah, go ahead.
So before we start wrapping up, one of the
Hmm.
things that we were talking off camera about was, sometimes a organization, whether they're an EOS practitioner group or not, might say, well, I don't need a sales process. I'm just going to go hire somebody and they know how to do sales. So that trap is they don't understand your process. They don't understand your perhaps your tribe or your information. They're bringing from their organization or where they were all the lineage of their good and bad experiences. And you're now trusting someone without any documentation, without any accountability to sell. Does
Right.
that make you comfortable?
We want to be successful. Salespeople want to be successful. So, using the sales department checkup, page 35 of the toolkit, is one way that we would recommend going into your next quarterly, your annual, to really come up with some great rocks for somebody who's sitting in the sales seat or an integrator who may be listening to this. And developing a clear sales process, obviously, we believe is something that you need to do, whether you do it yourself, whether you build it or buy it, is how we say. If you want more information on diving deep into a sales process, we're going to put in Slack access to our sales process audit. That is another deep dive on a checklist that you can utilize that was developed by the Sales Collective. Certainly could use that to design your own. And then also we have some, content on YouTube that we will be putting in here as well. I'm always available to talk through, strength test maybe the sales process you currently have in place, or talk about building a new playbook. So we'll put my Calendly in the link. And I just want to say thank you, Orlando, for taking the time away. I know you're heads down, you're the practitioner around the sales playbooks, and we just really appreciate all that you do. I don't have a process-driven mind, so I am always in awe of yours. So thank you very much. Anything else you want to wrap up with here?
No, I'll point out that in the chat, we've got our YouTube channel if you're interested in previous webinars and our future pieces. And then just as Kate was mentioning, there is her Calendly if you'd like to actually connect. I'd like to really thank our audience today. We appreciate you. We know that you have your time is very valuable, and we appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on this occasion of talking about how sales process really makes a difference. So Kate, it's been my honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, and we'll see you next month.
All right, take care.
Bye.